Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Mel Brooks's movie Blazing Saddles, which is one of the great comic films of all time. Mel Brooks, obviously a brilliant comic director, and I grew up in my Boy Scout troop when I was growing up. Mel Brooks was like exactly the type of humor that a number of the adults and their kids loved. So for me, there's always something nostalgic about watching a Mel Brooks movie. That being said, there is a lot of racist language in this film. There's a lot of racist stereotypes, which is not fantastic. That being said, a lot of what this movie does, a lot of what Blazing Saddles does, is satirically uses that racism and those racial stereotypes to confront racism. And I mean, some of these are genuinely like funny innovations, like the Native Americans speaking Yiddish. It was one of my favorite scenes, actually. Of course, Mel Brooks was Jewish, and he probably grew up among Yiddish speakers. And so for him, I mean, he's in red face, so that's problematic. I don't approve of that. I'll distance myself from that. But the idea of Native Americans speaking Yiddish, and that's their undecipherable language, right? Because, I mean, this was one of the things, the Navajo code talkers during World War II, the whole sort of shtick with them was the Nazis could never figure out how the Navajo language worked. So there is this idea that, like, you signal the ethnic other, but in this case, there is a sort of disconnect between the Yiddish language and the person speaking it. But also there's kind of not, because Mel Brooks is the person speaking it, but he is supposed to be a Native American at that point. Again, red face, I don't approve. It's bad stuff, don't do it. This was also back in the day when people were like, yeah, whatever, casual racism. So there's that stuff. It is, I would say, an anti-racist film for as much as there's a lot of use of the N-word, there's anti-Asian slurs, there's homophobic slurs, anti-indigenous elements. All of these things are bad. But again, the basic fundamental lesson of the movie is white racists are the villains. Headley Lamar, the main antagonist of Bart, who's the hero, African-American railroad worker, who then, when he and his friend are left to die in some quicksand, he bashes the rail boss's head with a shovel. He's going to be hanged, but then he gets promoted, strangely enough, to be the sheriff of the town of Rockridge, on the premise, Headley Lamar's plan, that basically if he puts a black sheriff, well, if the governor, also played by Mel Brooks, puts a black sheriff in charge of town, people will be like, nope, don't approve of this. I'm too racist. I'm gonna leave town now. So this is the thing. The plan counts on the racism of prairie folk, and indeed they are pretty racist. They're all jazzed up about getting the new sheriff, and then when Bart arrives and they see the color of his skin, they pull their weapons out to execute him. So yeah, it's a bad scene, but the fact that they are taking that attitude is the problem in the movie, or one of the problems in the movie. So again, there is this anti-racist element to the film as a whole, because the racism of the townsfolk and then the racism of Headley Lamar, particularly when he recruits all of these various evil people, including Klansmen, including Nazis, including vaqueros and Mexican bikers and Native Americans, which is much more problematic in terms of identifying them as villains. But again, there we go. So the fact that the forces of racism are the forces of evil in the film definitely tells us that this is ultimately meant to be an anti-racist film. Again, you have to get through a lot of casual racism in order to get there, and that's not amazing. But the thing that I think is really actually very interesting about the film is how much of the comedy is derived from meta-cinematic references. And this is especially prominent at the end. Like, at the end, they just basically give up all pretense that we're actually watching a Western. That we're actually watching events of the Old West. And basically they're just like, yeah, this is clearly Hollywood. Here's giant neon signs saying, this is Hollywood, this is a movie, stuff like this. Because at the end, there's a big fight between the townsfolk of Rockridge and the evil villains brought together by Hedley Lamarr. And this fight spills out of the stage where it's being filmed. It spills out into the streets of Hollywood, into the canteen or the dining hall or whatever it is, where a bunch of just random stars from different films in their weird random costumes are eating. So you've got like somebody who's playing Hitler, you've got somebody playing a Roman, you've got showgirls, they're all in their costumes just having a meal. And all of a sudden this fight of Old West random people breaks in and everybody sort of gets involved and there's a food fight. And they break into another set, a closed set, where they're doing some sort of musical number called The French Mistake. And this is a very homophobic bit because apparently all of the dancers, who are all male, are apparently all gay. And we need to have that signaled for us because humor, again, not a great thing. But so all of those dancers get involved after the rail boss punches the director of The French Mistake. And so it just spills out. It's just this uncontained brawl that just incorporates all of Hollywood is the premise here, basically. Like all of the movie sets and stuff get involved and all this stuff. Hedley Lamarr is actually in the canteen when the fight spills in there, and it turns into a food fight to a certain extent. And so Hedley Lamarr puts a pie on it, goes into the bathroom, puts a pie on his face, and manages to escape. And he goes out and he goes to a movie theater to watch the end of the movie that he is in, that is being filmed in this moment. So there is this, again, very overtly meta cinematic element where, like, he goes and he buys a ticket to the movie that we're currently watching. And he goes into the theater, and what he sees on the screen is that Bart is riding along the road in Hollywood toward the theater where he is. So Hedley goes out and they have their final sort of showdown. And then at the end, everything is sort of patched up. Everybody is happy. The townsfolk are like, Bart, please stay, be our sheriff. We won't be racist anymore. And Bart's like, nope, I'm going to go off somewhere where there's more adventure. And then he and Jim, the Waco Kid, played amazingly by Gene Wilder. Gene Wilder, one of my favorite actors. They ride off for a little bit, and then they get off their horses and they get in a limo and they're taken away. It is this sort of brilliant, just the excessive meta-cinematic elements of it make it a really, really smart ending to the film. It's very, very conscious of itself as existing within this highly stylized genre of the Western, right? So like Bart and Hedley have this showdown at the end, right? And it's this very cliched thing where like Hedley's like, you wouldn't shoot an unarmed man, and Bart's like, all right, I'll put my gun on the ground and we'll fight with our fists. And then Hedley's like, oh, I forgot, I got a gun. And Bart like dives for his gun and manages to shoot him. It's this cliched thing again, and this is part of what drives the humor. Racism also drives the humor. Homophobia also drives the humor. And again, those are not good. But one of the main drivers of the humor, and one of the things that I think helps the film stand the test of time, even with all of the problematic elements to it, is that it's so excessively meta-cinematic. It's not just that the film sort of points out, hey, you're watching a movie, you're watching specifically a Western, and there are things that Westerns do, is that the film devotes the entire last portion to making inescapable the fact that you are watching a movie and that you are watching a Western, and that there are specific things that occur in Westerns that we need to have occur in order to feel like the film has been brought to a successful conclusion, namely the showdown between the hero and the villain. And so this is one of the things. There's so many meta-cinematic movies out there. It's especially starting from the mid-70s. It became very, very common, and it's still quite common to have meta-cinematic elements in movies. What Brooks does that is unique is, again, he dials it up to 11 and says, we're not even going to pretend that what you are seeing makes any sense anymore as a story set in the Old West. We're abandoning all pretense of it, and we're going to go as far as we can to make it clear that we're abandoning that pretense. And that's it's an interesting technique, and it works really well, I think. It makes that movie, it makes it function on a level of self-consciousness that I think is very interesting. And I think that's why this movie still works today, even with all of the regrettable stuff that's in it.